We've learned so much today about the possibilities of AI, but now it's time to turn and think about how do we set our teams and our organisation up for a successful transition. And we want to talk to two global leaders about their experience leading their organisations to embrace technology in new ways. We'll learn a little more about the approach that they're taking, how they're thinking about it, what's working, what's hard, and their commitment to upskilling their workforce as well and investing in digital transformation to enable their organisation to do more. Doreen Bogdan-Martin, who I'm sure everybody knows, has held leadership positions in the field of international telecommunications policy for over 2 decades, with a track record of brokering innovative partnerships to expand digital inclusion and connectivity for everyone around the world. And Amy Pope became the Director General of the IOM in October 2023 and has really put IOM on a strategic path to ensure that they can respond to an increasingly complex migration landscape. And her vision to embrace technology in new ways really enables IOM to help save and protect people on the move today, but also to be really proactive about evolving challenges before they arise. So please welcome to the stage two leaders who are trailblazers, and for 2 reasons. One, they're not only charting successful digital transformation journeys for their own organisations, but they are both also the first female leaders of their respective organisations, and I think both of those things deserve an applause. Wherever you like. So welcome and thank you very much for being here. I said it this morning, but it's such a crazy busy week. I know there's lots of competing agendas, so we very much appreciate that you've been able to build us here into your schedule. So we're going to talk about change management, and Doreen, perhaps I can start with you. One of your stated priorities when you took office was ensuring a fit for future ITU. How do you think about technology and specifically AI? How does that figure into that objective that you have for digital transformation?
Well, thank you, Kate, and good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to see some friends in the crowd, and Justin, nice to see you as well. And always great to share the stage with Amy. Actually, when Amy was elected, or even before you were elected, we were sharing some thoughts about what leaders can do when they come into their positions, and I shared some of the things I did. And then a few months after Amy was in her position, we caught up again, and I learned so much more from her, in particular, some of the work that she was doing on AI. So just to say, ITU does not know it all, and we always need to learn from each other. I guess from my perspective, in terms of the ITU and my goals as a leader, so I took over an institution that's going to be 160 years old next year. And I say that because, and I often joke, sometimes I feel like some of our processes are probably almost 160 years old. And though we like to say we are the UN digital agency, and that we move from the telegraph to the telephone to the internet to AI, a lot of the things that we do internally in particular are very much outdated. And so when I came in, I wanted to make sure that the institution was fit for today and, of course, fit for tomorrow. So I launched this Fit for Purpose initiative focused on making ITU an organization of excellence. And I had 2 big priorities. One was on strategic engagement. So engagement with our member states. We now have 194 member states. With a new member state just a few days ago, Palau became an ITU member state. And we have over 1,000 private sector members, so strengthening that engagement was key. And the other piece was strengthening our work when it comes to thought leadership. And obviously the digital space evolves quickly, so to be able to stay on the cutting edge requires more investment internally as well as externally. And so how is that linked with this conversation about AI? We started to think about how we could leverage AI, of course, externally in our programs, but internally. Our friend Tedros often says we got to walk the talk. And definitely this is a case where ITU, but I also think the UN system as a whole really has to walk the talk. So we launched a Changemakers program. We went through this visioning exercise to try to understand what are the problems that we face? What are the challenges internally? What are the process issues? And we started to lay all of those issues out, and we went through this Changemakers initiative because we wanted the staff to feel a sense of ownership when it came to what we were trying to drive forward. So it's not a surprise that AI was at the top of that priority list, looking at ways that we can use artificial intelligence when it comes to event management, when it comes to event organization, when it comes to document management, when it comes to registration, when it comes to engaging with our members and being able to do better on CRM. And I say this, we're not done, but we're in the midst of that there are so many spaces that we can improve in leveraging AI internally. We started to offer a series of learning labs, as we call them, to staff, so that we had different organizations come in, talk about the tools that could be used. We've just launched an AI hub internally that pools together the different use cases internally where we're experimenting with AI. We have a translation tool that we're using, which has been incredibly resourceful because with our member states and the obligation to translate everything in 6 languages, and when the member state submits something late, there are many issues, even when it's on time. And so we now have agreement that we can use informal tools, so to speak. It's not an official translation, but we can use that, and that also helps to facilitate our governing body discussions and other internal discussions. We've used AI when we look at our webinars, in particular our webinars on AI. So we have our Artificial Intelligence for Good series, and of course Microsoft is a big partner of that. We have thousands of webinars that have been done, and so we've started to organize a capacity development program using AI to go through those webinars to try to help us actually create tools that can be used internally for capacity development, but also externally. That was probably a long answer.
It's great. I mean, I really love just sharing some of the practical examples because I think that that's what's so important. I mean, it's always important with technology that people understand how to use it, but I think one of the things that we're really seeing with AI is you have to bring it to life for people, and it's also a little bit of a habit. I loved how you talked about walking the talk. You're certainly not alone there. I mean, even in our organisation, we have to give people the space to be able to explore and, just use these new technologies. And even in my own team, I'm saying, look, try and save an hour a day. And if you can save an hour a day, what can you do with that hour a day? But perhaps, Amy, I'll turn to you. How does this focus on change management intersect with the work that IOM is doing in supporting migrant populations?
So first of all, I have to say thank you to you personally, Kate, but also your team here, because you've been such fantastic partners as we have tried to change our approach to the way we serve people on the move. Also, I have to say thank you to Doreen, because this is the woman that I reached out to when I said, IOM has some outdated practices. What can we do? How do you do it? And so she gave me some very, very clear, practical ways forward, including, by the way, this Changemakers initiative, which is such a good practice, right? It's like, how do you embed the big change? You get people involved at every single level. So for us, I mean, I know you said your initiatives may date back 160 years. I mean, ours really, really did. I mean, we still, I'm embarrassed to say, rely on Excel spreadsheets all the time. Even for the most basic HR things, I'll say, well, what does our geographical representation look like right now in our organization? And literally someone goes to the Excel spreadsheet and pulls it up and counts it. And by the way, usually gets it wrong, right? So we're looking, when I came into this job, I was looking at every single facet of our organization. How do we respond to our member states? How do we manage our HR? How do we create talking points? How do we provide better resources to people who need us most? And what we have found is that there is room for AI in every single facet of the work we do. Now, the big challenge is that it's clear, the use case is clear. Everything I do, there is a clear way to do it better. But getting people, especially people in our world who have grown used to doing things a certain way and feel very tied to those ways of doing things, I think is really the biggest challenge. So we are trying to take that on through a whole host of different things. But I'd say the number one thing is through what we do as leaders. So Microsoft came into one of our leadership team days. Once a month, I reserve a day for our whole senior leadership team to sit down and kind of go through the list of things. And we just focus on whether it's HR or whether it's ways of doing business or responding to the more acute humanitarian crises. But anyway, we used a couple of hours of our time together to have Microsoft come in and teach all of our senior leaders how to use the tools. And by the way, people loved it. People who are actually not that great at using computers were fascinated when they saw the ways that they could answer questions or make their day easier or manage their inbox in more effective ways. So I think having from the very top the use case defined, letting the leaders play with some of the technology and then figure out how it could apply to their work is probably the best thing you can do in terms of the change management.
I absolutely agree. And we'll come back in a little bit actually to the leadership from the top, because that is incredibly important and why you're both sitting here today. So thank you for that. And I think something you said earlier, the example about Excel, for me really kind of highlights what is so amazing about these new AI technologies. That it's the most powerful technology that we have probably ever seen, and yet it's so powerful in its simplicity. It's the fact that you can use it's a natural language interface, so you don't have to know how to use Excel. You just need to know what kind of report you want to run, and it can unlock the power of the technology behind behind what you're immediately looking at, which I think is why it's such a game changer. Doreen, maybe back to you. In a recent report on AI for UN activities, ITU looked at use cases across all of the SDGs. What do you see are you seeing today? And I know that we're all very much, still on this journey, but what are you seeing today as perhaps the biggest challenges and also the biggest opportunities?
Well, I think I'm happy to say that we have a Pact of the Future and we have a Global Digital Compact. So I think that's good. It was a little stressful this morning as we were sitting in the room, but now it's done. And so we have to look now to action and implementation. We have had the pleasure of leading this interagency group on AI, and I think some of you have been engaged in that group. We lead it together with UNESCO. And in the context of that group, and through many of you, we have documented some 400 use cases. And I think it's really critical, whether it's an internal HR-related issue or whether it's seeing Kelly in the room, something external. And one of the use cases, Kelly, that we documented was that hate-free platform. I think that was with you guys from UNHCR, and it had to do with hate speech linked to refugees and how you could use AI to kind of track and find hate speech online. And we have such great examples in the context of that exercise with FAO on water management, with ILO using AI tools with job seekers and job offerers. And so being able to look at those use cases, I think, gives us a lot of hope when it comes to the SDGs. We have 17% of the targets that are on track, unfortunately, but we see that with AI in particular, we can accelerate at least 70% of the SDG targets. We announced that last year. We firmly stand by it with our partners from UNDP, and I think the more that we can demonstrate those use cases, the more likely it will be that we can scale those cases. Yesterday we had our SDG, I have my little lanyard. Some of you might have been there. We gave out some great swag, and we're seeing our bags around town. It was part of the Digital Action Day. We had our SDG Digital with UNDP and OSET, and what was great, we had Juan also, I saw Juan somewhere in the room, with us, and we had a great demo on AI and early warning systems, and we also had Brad talking about energy-related issues and how to close the gap. But what was great about yesterday was on stage, in an unusual format in ECOSOC, specific use cases from all over the world, be it from the paraplegic to the refugee. And I think it was quite compelling and amazing to show how we can scale and leverage to help get the SDGs back on track and to achieve them by 2030. So this group that we have, this interagency group, continues, but I think it's important for all of us to continue to look at ways that we can leverage AI both internally but externally in our projects and programs.
Yeah, we spoke this morning about it's two things. We're seeing incredible innovations leveraging AI, which are helping solve a lot of the issues that are being faced across the SDGs. But there's also this other side around productivity and efficiencies and saving time and money for organisations, which, this morning we were saying that's often the work that happens a little more quietly and isn't the work that gets the headlines, but can actually drive really profound change for organisations. As we think about challenges, Amy, what are some of the biggest challenges that you've faced thinking about sort of the change management that IOM needs to go through as you're embracing this digital transformation journey?
So some of it's actually the culture of the humanitarian world, frankly. So those of us who work in the humanitarian space have grown used to just reacting. So, you look at a place like Somalia, where there are millions of people who've been displaced by drought, or the model that we all tend to use is, okay, 4 million people have been displaced. What are their needs? Let's make sure we get them shelter and food and, whatever their most basic necessities are. But what we've realized is that there is a sizable population that has been displaced because of climate change, right? So climate actually was responsible for more new displacements last year than conflict. And we know that there are hundreds of millions of people who live in communities that are extremely vulnerable to climate change. So it doesn't take a data scientist to know that there are going to be hundreds of millions of people who will be on the move absent some kind of intervention. So the question we pose for ourselves is, okay, do we actually need to wait until those hundreds of millions of people have been displaced before we start to engage and respond? Or could we build better interventions that are cheaper and save more lives by anticipating communities that will be on the move? So this is a total shift in the way that we respond to vulnerable communities. And you can't always do that in a space like conflict, right? But when it comes to climate, there is excellent evidence. There's excellent data out there that we can use and start to identify which communities are going to be most at risk. So that's the work we're doing with Microsoft. We're looking at communities that are at high likelihood of displacement. We're pulling data from other partners around the UN system. We're sharing this data. For example, WFP is looking at food insecurity. We know food insecurity can be a driver of displacement. And then our goal is to be able to tailor interventions on the front end. Now, there are two pieces. There's a big culture change in our organization, and there's a smaller one. The big culture change is starting to see as our responsibility the need to engage earlier, rather than, frankly, if I'm honest, chasing big money that comes with humanitarian response, right? Let's actually try to serve more people more efficiently sooner. Now, the second intervention, and this is the cultural change that I'm talking about, is to get our humanitarian responders, who are very happy to be dropped into the middle of a conflict zone and figure their way out of that response, to be able and incentivized to use this information to engage sooner. Now, we have some very good examples that we've worked with Microsoft to start to build that culture change. For example, the flooding that happened in Libya not that long ago, the Microsoft team reached out and said, hey, would you guys be interested in mapping of communities so that you can see who's being impacted by the flooding? That was a fantastic way to introduce to our traditional humanitarian responders a way that they could rely on data. So now our next step is to get them to look at that data when they're building out project interventions with our donor community, and to make the case that that's actually a way for the money to go further and have more impact and save more lives than just responding.
Well, I remember actually when I had the first conversation with you, maybe 18 months, two years ago now, when you were visiting Seattle, and you said much the same thing. And I think I left that meeting and went and spoke to the team and was so excited. It was like we have to talk more. But I remember that one of the things that you said was, you were really interested in thinking about how you can get information to other stakeholders, and you specifically talked about governments of those countries that would be receiving people that were migrating. And I think that that's is still, I think, top of mind for you.
Yep.
Doreen, what are some of the major bottlenecks preventing AI solutions from scaling globally and benefiting everyone, perhaps especially in developing countries?
Thanks, Kate. I mean, maybe just to pick up quickly on some of Amy's points, and then I'll come to your question. But the point about like preparedness and planning is so key, especially when it comes to like early warning, and the potential to be able to leverage data. We all possess tons of data, and to be able to put that data together and actually understand things and be able to predict things, and the ability of doing that and the potential to save lives, I think is critical and fundamental. I mean, even within the ITU, and this goes back to Excel spreadsheets, but in this case, they're not on Excel spreadsheets. They're in different databases. We have our ICT statistics, then we have our cybersecurity statistics, then we have our skilling statistics, then we have our space database, and they're not connected. And so, as we've been discussing, Kate, how can you pool all that information so that you can actually see what's happening in a country? Where are the gaps? This comes to your question. I think the biggest bottleneck and the biggest gap is that today we have 2.6 billion people that are not connected to the internet. And so when we talk about artificial intelligence, if you're not connected, you're not going to be part of the AI revolution. So I think the biggest challenge is to close that access gap. Of course, there's other bottlenecks. There's the compute gap, there's the talent gap, and we need to zoom in and try to focus on closing those gaps. What I think is helpful about the Global Digital Compact is it puts the emphasis on the need really close the digital divide and to do that now. One of the ways that we're trying to address the gap, of course, on the access gap through our partnership, pledging platform partner to Connect, and Microsoft is a big partner, but also on the capacity gap, and I see my colleague Fred in the room. We just launched our AI Skilling Coalition, which I think will be a good contribution to upskilling. We also have our AI Hub for Sustainable Development, where we've partnered with UNDP. That effort is focused on 9 countries. So I think if we focus on those specific gaps, we can try to really turn it into actionable areas where we can partner and make a difference.
Yeah, connectivity is certainly number one. There's lots of adoption and change management literature that tells us the number one predictor of success is how active and visible the leader is in sponsoring the change. You have both leaned in tremendously and have been really visible, and I think what makes such a difference is the investment of time and leaning into actually define the problems or the issues that you think are most important where technology can help. I mean, technology sort of for technology's sake isn't what's important. But perhaps you can share some best practices. Amy, you shared a few earlier about how you've thought about your role in sponsoring and driving digital transformation in your organisation, and perhaps also because, I mean, you both have incredibly large portfolios and you're time poor. How do you think about delegating or not aspects of that change management journey?
Should I start?
Yes.
So one thing I have to give you all at Microsoft a shout out, because some of this came out for me when I attended the executive workshop that you invited IOM
In Kenya?
Before that.
Before that.
Even before that, out in Seattle,
Oh, yeah.
where
Yep.
Satya, where we saw the experience from Satya and the change that he was driving at Microsoft. And to be perfectly honest with you, I'd always heard about Microsoft's toxic culture. And when years before, there was a whole within.
We're keeping it real here.
I know. But the reason I'm putting that on the table, is because the perception was that Microsoft had a toxic culture, and then that perception started to change, and the narrative started to change. And what was clear to me going to that executive workshop was that was a deliberate change that was driven from the very top, and that it was broken down into a cross-organizational, both laterally and vertically, approach. It was systematic. And for me, that actually drove home the importance of my role and empowering our leadership teams around the organization if we wanted to achieve change. So it's a good story, right? But what
it has a happy ending.
It has a happy ending, right? But it's real, right? It was a real problem and a real change. But that change only came because of bringing this very specific, targeted, strategic approach that was then implemented across the board. And I think, people ask me all the time, kind of what keeps you up at night, right? People love to ask folks sitting in our positions that question. And for me, it's not, you could say any number of things, Gaza, Ukraine, whatever terrible things happening, climate change. But actually what keeps me up at night is that I'm sitting in this position of influence and not fully leveraging the position I sit in for the time that I sit in it, right? We only sit in it for a certain amount of years. Like, you don't get, this is not forever. And so it's that pressure that keeps me up at night. And what I see, the reason why I sponsor this change is because I see using AI the opportunity for us to reach millions, maybe hundreds of millions more people, to save hundreds of millions of more lives, and to create better outcomes for people who really have no other option or no other advocate. So that for me is what, I have this mission, and I see AI as a tool to help us achieve that mission. And I know from looking at your experience and other people's experiences that unless we lay out across our entire organization a plan for achieving it, it'll just be an idea and it won't be a reality.
Wow, that was so well said, Amy. And I think, similar things keep me up at night as well. It's that pressure to advance. And I think when I took up my position, I think I was relatively well prepared in terms of what I wanted to achieve. And my to-do list was like 100 things. And when I look at that to-do list today, it's actually longer. And so that kind of freaks me out. But I feel this pressure that we got to get through it, and the opportunity to be able to leverage AI to push through those long things on your list. It's there, and I know that it can happen. And I think as a leader, we have to show that we're engaged, that we're committed, that we believe, and that we're interested and we're listening. And I think we can't do it by ourselves. So having a core group of believers, and I try each day to get more people on the converted side. I'd like to think I'm close to the majority, but there's still a handful of skeptics out there. And so how can you get those skeptics to kind of come over and believe in the change? And I think it's about delegating, it's about empowering, and it's about giving a voice to sort of all levels of the organization. I mentioned before the Change Makers group, which it was a bunch of volunteers from across the organization. What's great in that group is we also have like a youth Change Makers group. I think that group in particular, and they're very vocal, is keeping us on track and really trying to help advance those changes. And of course, you have your monthlies, we have our monthlies, having those regular carved out times that you can go through with leadership, go through with staff to make sure that you're moving forward.
I think I also stay up at night a little bit thinking about the fact that this is, it really feels like such a unique moment in time, and I think none of us want to squander this moment, and also, very much feel the responsibility as well to make sure that these technologies are being used in positive ways for the world. I know that we're out of time, and I know you both have a very hard stop, but I just want to thank you so much, both for your leadership and the work that you're driving in your respective organisations, and also, I think for sharing some really practical examples here with the audience. We have a lot of UN and other leaders in the room today, many of whom may be thinking about their own digital transformation journey, and I think it's really important that we create some forums like this to be able to share how we're all approaching it, because we very much are on this journey together.